Deliberate Leaders. I am your host, Allison Dunn, founder of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, dedicated to helping leaders build strong, thriving businesses. Each episode, we feature inspiring interviews to help you on your leadership journey, and that makes me very excited to introduce our guest today. We have with us Ed Evarts. He is a team coach, strategist, podcast host, and author. He is also the founder and president of Excellius Leadership Development, which is based in Boston. His newly released book, which is titled Drive Your Career, 9 High-Impact Ways to Take Your Responsibility for Your Own Success. I am very excited to have this conversation with you here today, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Allison. Thank you for welcoming me on your podcast.
Absolutely. So I like to kick these off with a deliberate conversation. And I guess my question for you today is, what would be your number one leadership tip for our Deliberate Leaders listeners?
You know, I think the number one word for this decade is empathy. Mm-hmm. And today it's a little bit of a softer word, or a lot of people don't see the value in respect to being more empathetic in the workplace. Yet I believe, based on my own work experience, as well as the work that I do with clients, that being more empathetic is a strategic strategy, that this is a great way to build relationships, to build engagement, and to really meet people where they are so that you can influence them more positively. So a tip I would provide leaders today is to, read an article, read a book. Google today, you can put in a word and get a million responses, but figure out, 2 or 3 ways that you could be more empathetic and start practicing it in the workplace. I guarantee you, the greater empathy you show, the greater influence you'll have at your organization.
Mm-hmm. That is a wonderful tip. I personally have found myself trying to tap into just really understanding, being frustrated waiting in line, knowing that labor's short, and just being thankful that the person who is serving me is in a good mood and they're doing the best they can. And so there's a lot of areas in our life where empathy is it's powerful.
It is. And, that's the beauty of it. You can practice it anywhere. So it's not only just in the workplace, but, as a consumer, as a family member, as a neighbor, right? You have to demonstrate opportunities for empathy. And so if you're looking to get better at relationships, it's a great thing to work on and practice, as a business professional.
Yeah. So so let's build on that. So how can people find ways to build empathy as an individual in their role in things? What are some go-to tips that you would suggest that help people keep that front of mind?
Yeah, well, the hardest tip in my mind is actually noticing that somebody may be behaving in a way that requires you to show empathy. I've worked with clients who consider themselves to be highly unempathetic, and a person could come into their office crying and they wouldn't even notice. But their goal is to look for ways to be more empathetic. So the first thing is to really figure out, how can I be more observant in respect to people I work with, people that I see every day. People say we spend a third of our lives at work. That's a lot of time spending with other people. So you should have a good sense of kind of who they are and how they operate. So, step number one is identifying that somebody's behaving or seems to be acting in a way that's a little bit different. Step number two is really approaching them. And I'm a big believer in asking for permission. So you don't just come in and say, hey, what's wrong? But you say, hey, you seem to be a little bit different today. Are you open to talking about it? Because a person who gives you permission to talk about it with them is more likely to be candid and honest with you than somebody you just approach and say, hey, you seem upset, what's going on? So noticing it and then asking for permission are 2 great steps in order to, kind of start the conversation where you can demonstrate empathy with the other person.
Mm. One of the techniques that I witness a lot is noticing it and then assuming it has something to do with me as opposed to you, right? So I love that reversal of getting permission, acknowledging what you're visually seeing, and then getting permission to talk about it, not assuming it's me.
Right. And that is one of the key definitions of empathy, which is, kind of putting yourself at their level.
Mhm.
So rather than expecting people to always to come to you or always behave in a way that you expect, if somebody's having a tough day, and it may be for personal reasons or professional reasons, going to their level and saying, hey, you don't seem to be yourself today, or you seem upset about something. Would you be open to talking about it? The person might say, no, I'm not really in the mood right now. Or, yes, I would love to be able to talk to somebody about this issue. And then you can talk with them about the issue that they're experiencing, offer to help in ways that you can, and try to get them back on track, right? So they can keep moving forward and feeling good about it. So, I think it is about kind of meeting them where they are versus you expecting them to always kind of come to your level.
Right. Excellent advice. So let's dive a little bit into your book. So what advice would you give listeners who are wanting to be more of a driver and less of a passenger within their role?
Well, this book came, Allison, from my 13 years as a leadership coach. And I began to observe 4 or 5 years ago that there were certain stories or experiences that I was sharing with more and more clients. And so these 9 behaviors really are the pieces of advice or experience that I've shared with most people most often. And it wasn't purposeful. I wasn't like creating these opportunities to share these stories with them, but it happened just naturally. And so whether they are a supervisor or a mid-manager or a CEO or president, these pieces of advice are things that they need to know and be aware of in order to be more of a driver of their career. And so the catalyst of it came from my experience in working with people that many of them were passengers, that they were in a role or in a situation. It wasn't exactly what they wanted, or it wasn't working out the way they thought it would. And they needed to kind of take the wheel and decide where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, right? And, part of it has to do with tenure, right? That you get to a certain age and level where you're like, hey, I don't know if I'm doing what I thought I would do with my life, and I want to be more of a driver of my career. And some of it might be functional, that you're moving in a particular direction and it isn't the direction that you'd want to move in. So, these 9 pieces of advice are designed to help people. 2 quick examples I'll give you. The first chapter is called How to Have a Positive Relationship with Your Boss. And the importance of having a positive relationship with your boss cannot be understated. You don't have to be best friends, you don't have to go out for margaritas on Cinco de Mayo, but you do need to have a positive relationship so that they think about you positively, because a boss who thinks about you positively is more apt to give you projects and visibility and opportunity than a boss you don't have a positive relationship with. And if you don't get along with your boss, and if any of our listeners are not getting along with their boss, they should be thinking about 2 or 3 things they could do differently in order to have that type of relationship. Do you want me to keep sharing others, or do you have
I
any?
would, because I was hoping if you would in some way kind of do a high level overview and then pick the top few that you really feel like would be great takeaways for today so they could take action.
Yeah. So, well, the first one would be ensuring that you have a positive relationship with your boss. Some of the other high level areas we talk about are being the most curious person in the room, playing the hand you've been dealt. When you look at the workplace you're in, recognize what it is, but how do you play that hand? Recognizing that life's a bell curve, that there are going to be people who love what you do, but there may also be people who don't like what you do. And how do I address the people who don't like what I do versus the people, that do like what I do? So those are, some of the chapters that we talk about in the book to help people really focus on being more of a driver of their career. The first chapter, and they're not in order of importance. I think any 9 could be of helpful to people. You could start at the last chapter, which by no great coincidence is called, it's also all about empathy. So I do have a chapter that talks about empathy. I have a chapter that talks about feedback. These are all great skills that great leaders need to have. So we've talked about how to be a positive, how to have a positive relationship with your boss. We've talked about how to have empathy. My other quick favorite chapter is playing the hand you've been dealt. And so like a poker hand, you can't decide the hand that you're going to be dealt in the workplace. That when you are working, your environment is what it is. And there are pluses to where you work, and there may be some negatives to where you work. But regardless of whether your workplace has pluses and negatives or more negatives than pluses, it's the hand you've been dealt. And so, like you, I work with clients to figure out how to play that hand, right? So what are you going to do about the hand that you've been dealt? And how do you ensure that you're working to make it a more positive work environment for others?
I would love to kind of dive into the first one and then the hand you've been dealt. So, what's identifying two or three things that you could do to improve your relationship with your boss? What happens if it's not being reciprocated?
So, right, there's no magic formula that says, hey, if I do the following three things, every boss is going to fall in love with me. First off, there are bosses who you will never have a great relationship with just based on their style and how they've developed professionally and their agenda. They just might not be the type of person whom anyone can have a close relationship with. So, knowing that and acknowledging that is very important. And this kind of goes back to playing the hand you've been dealt. If the hand you've been dealt is that you work for a boss who is impossible to work for, you have choices to make in respect to your career. And if I were driving my career, I would want to acknowledge that I want to be in a workplace where I can have a positive relationship with my boss because I know I would have better experiences and better outcomes. So I need to decide, do I move elsewhere in the company where I can have a better relationship with the boss? Do I leave the company and go find another environment where I can have a better relationship? These are all important questions that people need to consider. One of the outcomes of playing the hand you've been dealt is bluffing. And I would tell you, Allison, that most of my clients are bluffing. They're pretending things are better than they are. And a lot of them have to do with boss subordinate relationships. So acknowledging that it might not be as good as it could be, doing certain things proactively to try to improve it are important. But there are going to be a percentage of time and experiences where they're just never going to get better. And you have choices to make as to how you want to drive your career and make progress.
I love the fact that you've kind of pointed out. I mean, there are a lot of people bluffing out there for sure, and therefore being a passenger in their own career. What tips or guidance would you give if you love the organization? Maybe your direct supervisor leader is not necessarily a strong connection for you. Is it okay to go around?
So, it is something that actually in my book, Raise Your Visibility and Value, I talk about a leader whom people don't get responses from, who has become a black hole. And one of the key outcomes of that is people go around the boss, because if I can't get answers from you or you're never going to respond to me, I still need answers. So I'm going to have to go elsewhere. I don't personally believe that that's a good behavior, because I think that erodes things that are happening in the workplace. And if you start going around people, it adds drama and complication. I'm a more transparent person. And so I believe diving straight into the situation and working with an accountability partner, a friend, a family member, a coach, whoever, to construct the conversation to have with your boss to say, look, I don't want to go around you. I don't want to speak to others about things you and I should be speaking about. What can we do differently in our relationship if you're interested in participating in how we can improve this? Because this is something I'm experiencing. I'm going to guess, and this is oftentimes true, Allison, that if I'm experiencing it, others are. So it's not just me. Oftentimes people think, why is it always me? And in reality, it's not just you, it's other people as well are all experiencing it. I don't act differently with different people. I treat everyone pretty much the same. So, I believe that you shouldn't ideally go around people. You should work straight on the issue and try to resolve it.
Okay. Yeah. Good. When should individuals realize that it's time to actually put on the brakes?
So, and a couple of answers, one in respect to, how to have a positive relationship with your boss. Putting on the brakes might be this idea of folding, where if it's just not a good work environment, if it's not a good culture, if it's not a good fit for you, it is okay to find another opportunity that might be. A lot of people think of work as a relationship, and I don't want to break up, right? So I'm going to keep trying to make it work, even though nobody else is playing. And I tell people that at some point in your career, there is no magic or secret formula behind recruitment. You just might need to say, look, this isn't working for me. I need to pause and move on elsewhere. I also have a chapter in the book that talks about pausing. And pausing is this idea of putting on the brakes, which is a behavior where you spend more time up front and through pausing, thinking about what it is you want to work on and how you want to work on it, especially if you're working with a team, rather than starting too quickly and then having to clean it up at the end, oftentimes making you late to a client deliverable. And so this happened to me oftentimes during my corporate career. It happens all the time with my business clients that they kick things off. They're highly articulate, they're high energy, it's go, 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 and they go. And then they realize later that people weren't clear on direction. People weren't doing a great job because of that lack of clarity. And so they had to go back and fix or redesign things they had worked on. And ultimately, they have to go to the client and say, hey, we hit a snag or we're having some issues. We're going to be a couple of minutes late. So this idea of pausing is allowing others to catch up to where you are as the leader, so that you can ensure we're all leaving, at the same point in time and moving in a consistent direction.
What kind of language would you use to be able to kind of get that pause opportunity? Like, how do you present it?
Well, I think a large piece of it is about transparency, as well as somebody who wants to pause, right? I can't force anyone to do something they don't want to do. But if a leader says, hey, Ed, I do think we should invest more time upfront versus later, I'd say great. And what I would suggest that they do is at team meetings, if they're sharing ideas or if they have the time and action calendar they're working on and they're ready to go, they say, hey, we've got our time and action calendar. Everybody's shaking their head that they understand and know what they need to do next. It seems like we're ready to go. But before we go, I want everyone to take a few days. I want you to visit the time and action calendar. I want you to visit your objectives and goals. And next week, when we meet again, I want to hear from you questions, observations about what it is we need to think a little bit more about before we pull the trigger. Even if it's me repeating something I've already said, it's okay for me to repeat something, because oftentimes leaders will say something, and because I want to be complicit and a good employee, I'll say, yes, I understand, or yes, I have it, when I don't, right? And I always think, well, I'll figure it out later, right? So, it's providing people this window of opportunity to come back before we go to ensure we're ready to go, right? It's making sure people heard what I said versus just shaking their head like I got it and they don't. So a large piece of this, Allison, has to do with leader role modeling, which is me demonstrating the behavior that I'm expecting of others, which is, if there's anything I've said that you don't understand, I'd love to hear that next week so I can go over it again, because it's more important that we start off well than just go and have to clean it up later.
Okay, fantastic. You have brought up curiosity, and curiosity is one of my core values, and just something that has been kind of magical, I guess, in my life because of that approach. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on the power of curiosity.
Sure. I first learned about curiosity in a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Probably one of the first books on leadership style, written by Stephen Covey. And in it, he lists 7 habits. And habit number 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And unfortunately, in most corporate organizations, we do the opposite. We work first to be understood, and then if we have time, I'll try to understand you. But, first I want to be understood, right? So curiosity is all about understanding where other people are coming from, where they're getting their ideas, why they think about what they're thinking about, where are they coming from before I start sharing my perspective. And the beauty of it is that the more I know about others and the more I understand about where they're coming from and why they're thinking what they're thinking, the better my position is going to be, because now I have more knowledge to work from. If I just share what I'm thinking and nobody else has talked, it could be a minefield of issues and problems and different perspectives. And again, if everyone's being complicit, they're going to say, sounds good, and off they go when they all don't really agree. So curiosity, I think, is a key leadership behavior along with empathy regarding how to ensure that you understand others before you expect them to understand you.
Do you think that curiosity has a balance in the conversation of speaking and listening? Is there any perfect ratio on that, at being curious, but then also stopping to listen?
Well, I love that perspective. I don't know if there is a mathematical relationship, but it is a balance between curiosity and listening. If you're a terrible listener, then what's the point of asking a question, right? So you have to ask a great question, and then you have to go silent and listen to what the person has to say, whether you agree with them or not. This is not about agreement. This is about understanding. So it's important I understand your perspective, even if I don't agree with it. So as you know, as somebody who does this work and for whom curiosity is a core value, when you ask a good question, you'll get a good answer. And that answer will create an opportunity for another question, right? So you could be a great leader who never tells anybody anything, that you just ask questions to help them come to their own conclusions. We hear the example oftentimes of a great leader when someone comes in and says, Allison, I have a problem. What do I do? And the great leader says, why don't you tell me what your options are? What do you think? And it might be, well, I don't know. That's why I came to you. And I'd say, well, why don't you think of 2 or 3 options and let's meet about it this afternoon or tomorrow? I'd love to hear what you're thinking. The answers might be before I share with you what I'm thinking. So it just creates a better relationship. It creates more engagement, more empowerment. Curiosity, I just believe, is one of the most underutilized skills. I have challenge with it sometimes because I love talking about what it is I do. And oftentimes I'm not curious enough to understand who I'm talking to, before I make great progress.
Great insights. I've got one final question that I'm going to open it up to you to see if there was anything else we wanted to share. Knowing that we have, or at least in the US, kind of a labor shortage challenge going on right now, how can people take the careers that they're in and create higher impact where they are, knowing that there's this also other challenge of there's not enough support, there's a drain kind of going on. So what are your insights? What are you seeing, and what would be your guidance?
Well, that is a very big question.
I know.
But I would tell you that first, there's a degree of self-awareness that people need to have about their situation and where they are in their career and how they are doing. And it's really more of a self-assessment. It's not a comparison to others. People love to compare themselves to other people's titles and other people's compensation, other people's career path, et cetera. But it's really about yourself and thinking about and building your self-awareness about where you are and how it's going. Certainly in Drive Your Career, you can find some ideas and suggestions on things that you can do to be more of a driver of your career. But I'll tell you, the number one thing that I would do if I were one of those people, and by the way, everybody believes themselves to be busy. Anytime I've asked anybody in a corporate organization, how is it going? I wish I had a nickel for every time the person said, busy. Oh, I'm so busy. We're so busy. Everybody is busy. And part of it is that as organizations grow, they have less people doing more. So it's not more people doing less. They have less people doing more. And as people get laid off, they don't replace them. They now have less people doing it, right? So now my job is doubled and tripled. But the one thing that I would do is I would find an accountability partner. And this is a friend or a colleague or coach or somebody whom I could work with to ask me these questions and explore deeply, what my interests are, where I want to be, what I want to be doing, create a simple, basic time and action calendar. It might be have a conversation with my boss. It might be update my resume, whatever it might be, and hold me accountable to it. The challenge we have as business professionals is not having ideas. Again, we could Google leadership style, professional behavior, and get millions of responses. We don't need more ideas. We need ways to convert ideas to actions that I really do. And so an accountability partner is somebody who can help me ensure I take action. And that's what I would do.
Fantastic. Do you have any final closing thoughts that you wanted to share that I didn't think to kind of ask you or tee up?
No, I really enjoyed speaking with you, Allison. Again, I think there are behaviors people can do that maybe they're not thinking about today because they are so busy. I would do a self introspective type view of how busy am I at work? Am I finding time to grow and develop as a leader? And I don't mean by attending a training program, but am I working with a colleague to help get better at what I'm doing? And really be self-reflective so that you can decide how you can be more of a driver of your career. Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? Those are great questions that each of us should ask ourselves so we can ensure that we're moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. I will make sure that I include a link to your book in the show notes. What are the best way for people to follow you?
Yeah, I would go to excellius.com, and that's EXCELLIUS.com. There's everything there that certainly is of interest to folks. I'm, of course, on LinkedIn, and Excellius Leadership Development is on Facebook as well. So you can connect with us there.
Fantastic. Ed, thank you so much for joining us, folks who have listened today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to share any of your aha moments from this episode in the comments section. Ed, thank you so much.
Allison, it was great speaking with you today. Thank you.
You as well.